Okay, I know this isn't what I advertised that I was going to be doing on Wednesday, so please accept my apologies for that, and I'll try to explain why I'm doing this video rather than the video on my camera equipment. Now, I have reached a kind of a crossroads, I think, with this channel. It's been incredibly hard keeping it going during the winter months. I am the kind of guy that likes to get out and try my best to obtain some memorable footage on the subject of motorcycling rather than just standing in a garage for every episode. And that has been a real challenge to keep going over the winter months. And for a long time I've been looking to take this channel up to another level. Complacency is a killer for a YouTube channel, and if you don't mix it up every now and again and strive to just raise the bar, you soon find that your ratings and your views start to slip down. And to me, it might just be the winter months that's caused that, but I feel as though that's what's happening with this channel. Now, buying new camera equipment is difficult because the financial rewards of working on YouTube, especially for a channel of my size, are negligible. But there is a piece of equipment that I've been hankering after for well over a year, and I thought if I am going to do a video on my camera equipment, I really do need to include that. Now, I haven't pulled the trigger on it yet. I'm going to make the decision over this weekend, and then hopefully, depending which way I go, I'll either have it by the middle of next week or I won't if I've decided against it. It does constitute a huge investment for the channel, so there has been a lot of hesitation involved. But rest assured, either way, I will do that video on the camera equipment for those that are interested in the next week or two. But for today, I wanted to do something which I don't think has been done before. There might be a video out there that I've not seen, and that is a comparison of the old air-cooled Triumph T100 against the new water-cooled T120. Now, before we get started, let's look at why I think people buy Triumph Bonnevilles. I'll give you my take, my reasons for switching to a Triumph Bonneville over the bikes that I've been riding for the last 15 years. Now, 2 years ago, I was riding the third or fourth BMW R1200 GS Adventure that I'd owned. Don't get me wrong, it was a lovely bike, cutting edge motorcycle technology, and it had all the bells and whistles that appeal to a man of a certain age. It was a touring tool. But what I was starting to realise is, as a bike, it was too serious, it was too focused on one particular use. And for me, something had gone missing from motorcycling over the years. And for a long time, I couldn't put my finger on exactly what it was. Now, I've been riding bikes for some 37 years, and I've had a lot of bikes. But while I was searching in my mind as to what it was that had gone missing from motorcycling for me, my memories sort of settled on two bikes that I'd owned in the past. Now, these were both what used to be referred to as a rat bike. They were cheap second-hand bikes that I'd bought purely for commuting to and from work. And that was a Honda 200 Bentley and a Yamaha XS250. Both twin-cylinder bikes, both rusting and falling to pieces. But both of them were heaps of fun. They handled okay, there was nothing spectacular about that. They were both reliable, but most importantly, they were convenient, they were easy, they were fun. You didn't feel that you had to don £1,000 worth of adventure suit before you climbed on them. You just threw on a bike jacket, a pair of gloves and your helmet, and you were away. You didn't have to think about riding them, you just slung your leg over and you were off. They were convenient because they were relatively small. You could park them anywhere. And I realised that for me, that was what was missing from motorcycling. That whole true freedom of motorcycling had disappeared from my life as a biker. Now, coincidentally, both of these bikes were indirectly derived from that original Triumph Bonneville. And as I looked around, the Triumph Bonneville stood out among everything else, among every other model on the market, has probably been the bike that would bring back that enjoyment to motorcycling that I'd lost. And the rest, as they say, is history. I got a T120, I loved it, and I'm still loving it. And then in November of last year, I got the Payday Projects Triumph T100 air-cooled Bonneville. It was bought as a means to an end. I expected it to be a poor second cousin to the T120. And okay, in some ways it is, but they're not chalk and cheese. They are in actual fact very similar bikes. Triumph heralded the new water-cooled twins as being a major step up in quality and build quality, but they're not. Once you peel away the skin on the Triumph T120 and compare it to what's underneath the skin of the Triumph T100, in actual fact, quality-wise, there's very little difference. It's all just smoke and mirrors. And let's face it, you are paying a huge premium for that smoke and those mirrors. Now, the new T120 is over £10,000 new, although there are some starting to appear second-hand on the market for around about £8,500. But the flip side is that there are a lot more second-hand examples of the air-cooled twin on the market than there are the T120. And not everyone's got huge amounts of money to spend on a bike. For a lot of people, a second-hand air-cooled twin is either all they can afford or all they can justify spending. And as the Payday Projects bike has demonstrated, it's quite easy to get a low mileage, super clean, almost as good as new air-cooled T100 for not a lot of money compared to the water-cooled twins. And certainly looking at the market, to me, it seems that the air-cooled twins are still holding the value far better than the water-cooled twins are. Now, I'm not going to get into specifications and BHP and traction control and ABS. I just want to talk about what the bikes are like to live with and how they make you feel as day-to-day transport or just as a weekend scoot. Now, both of these bikes grab a lot of attention wherever you go. And those famous words, "that's a lovely restoration, mate, what year is it?" rings in your ears every time you park it up. And that goes for both bikes, so age-related snobbery as far as motorcycle ownership goes doesn't apply to either of these bikes. They both look like something that was built in the 1960s, and that's exactly what the manufacturer intended. So there's absolutely no kudos to be derived from having the latest water-cooled iteration of this particular model of bike. Performance-wise, on paper, they look very different, with the 1200cc water-cooled twin apparently having a huge advantage over the old air-cooled T100. But in the real world, in modern day traffic situations, that counts for absolutely nothing. The old T100 still can hold its own in any traffic situation without breaking into a sweat, and neither bike is particularly comfortable at much over 60 miles an hour. In fact, the only area in my mind that the T120 has a slight advantage over the old T100 is in handling. That big 19-inch wheel on the front of the T100 does slow the steering down considerably, making it feel a little bit cumbersome at low manoeuvring speeds. But to me, that's not a deal breaker, because at normal riding speeds it's unnoticeable. And although the T120 might have a slight edge in steering geometry, in the real world it's something that you soon learn to overcome on the T100, something that becomes a distant memory rather than a constant niggle. Both bikes have bags of character, but in the transition from air-cooled to water-cooled engines, Triumph have watered it down a little bit. The engine on the T120 is still a lovely engine, but somehow it has more of a feel of a cold, clinical Japanese parallel twin from the 80s or the 90s than a gutsy, torquey British twin from the 1960s. And of the two engines, the T100 feels to me as though it has the most character. It's the most authentic of the two. Despite its lack of power compared to the water-cooled twin, it feels more satisfying to ride. It somehow just feels more British. The suspension on the old air-cooled twins was always criticised as being woefully inadequate, and I can't argue with that because it most certainly is. But then again, although it was a slight improvement on the T120, the stock suspension was nothing to write home about on that bike either. So in both cases, a suspension upgrade is a must. Now when it comes to braking, those twin piston Nissin calipers on the old Triumph T100 mated with the Sunstar discs came in for a lot of criticism, and the bike was always described as being inadequate in the braking department. Now I've put quite a few hundred miles on this bike so far, and I simply don't find that to be the case. The single disc up front and the single disc at the back are perfectly adequate, and in any eventuality that could easily be improved with a better set of pads and some braided stainless steel hoses. The T120 actually carries exactly the same braking system, albeit that they've put an extra disc and caliper on the front, and it does have a rudimentary ABS system. And although it does substantially improve the braking on the T120, those cheap and nasty front forks can barely cope with it. And it doesn't take an awful lot of provocation to have those front fork stanchions twisting and flexing. The fit and finish on both bikes is really good, but I wouldn't say that the new water-cooled twin is any better than the old one. I love both bikes, and both bikes have both the negatives and the positive points. They were both built by Triumph as a customization platform in an attempt to cash in on that custom parts industry that Harley Davidson's enjoyed for so many years. Probably more with the new water-cooled twins than with the older air-cooled twins. And in both iterations, with that in mind, Triumph has penny pinched on certain areas of the bikes, presumably thinking that that will prompt you to go and spend a load more cash with them for some custom parts to get the bikes up to the spec that they should have been in when they left the factory. Which bike the individual chooses to own is purely down to the individual, and I think the size of his bank balance. Some people like to keep the bikes stock, I know that, but there are also a lot of people who buy these bikes with a view to customising them and making them their own. So in a lot of cases, whoever buys either of these models, whether it be the air-cooled twin or the water-cooled twin, they're buying them with a view to spending more money on them to improve them or personalise them. And as my channel has demonstrated over the last year, there is an ever-growing number of custom parts being added to the shelf for the water-cooled twin. But there is a far greater choice for the air-cooled twin, a choice which is in fact still growing. Now this review or comparison of the two bikes isn't intended to be a tool to help you choose which is the better bike, because I don't think either of them are better than the other. They're just slightly different. When I need to go somewhere, when I'm going out for a ride on the bike, I don't have a favourite between these two that I automatically go to every time. It's always a difficult choice as to which bike I'm going to take out, because they are both excellent bikes. But the elephant in the room is obviously the price difference between the two. The water-cooled Triumph T120 is gradually edging towards the £11,000 mark brand new. And if your intention is to personalise it, there are X amount of thousands of pounds to be added to that, which does make it a very expensive proposition. On the other hand, there are hundreds, possibly even thousands of low mileage garage Queen Bonnevilles sitting in garages all over the world. Bikes that are barely being ridden, that to all intents and purposes are mechanically, and if looked after properly, aesthetically almost like brand new. And if you sort the wheat from the chaff, one of these can be had for less than £5,000. They have a reputation for being a reliable, bomb-proof bike, and replacement parts are plentiful and reasonably priced. So in a lot of respects, the old air-cooled twin still makes sound sense to any prospective buyer, whether you want to keep it stock or whether you want to work on it. Now if you're sitting on the fence and you're wondering which one to go for, whether it be the old or the new, I hope this video has helped you to just perhaps put things into perspective. and I do hope that you've enjoyed this video and that you found it useful. If you have enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe to my channel. I will be back next Wednesday where we're going to start on the front end of the air-cooled T100. So until then, please ride safely and I'll see you soon.